The city breathed above him, a constant rumble of engines and footsteps that never stopped, not even at 3 in the morning. Below, in the labyrinth of tunnels and platforms, Elias Keller had learned to become a ghost. For 3 years, the metro station at Central Square had been his home, his shelter, and his observatory. He knew every vent that pumped warm air during winter, every corner that remained dry during rain, and every schedule of the security guards who occasionally tried to move him along. Elias was 53 but looked 70, his face a roadmap of hard living and harder luck, framed by a tangled gray beard and eyes that had long ago stopped expecting anything good from people. He positioned himself behind a thick concrete pillar near the end of the platform, a spot that offered him a narrow view of the benches while keeping him hidden from the main flow of commuters. His possessions were minimal: a worn sleeping bag, a backpack with a change of socks, and a small plastic bag containing half a sandwich a tourist had given him earlier. He wasn't begging tonight, he was just existing, watching the digital clock on the platform count down the minutes until the next train. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the polished floor. A few late-night workers waited further down, their faces buried in phones, their minds miles away from the tired man in the shadows. Elias preferred it that way. Invisibility was his only protection. It happened at 3:47 a.m. The station was nearly empty. A woman in a dark coat stood near the edge of the platform, her back to Elias, her posture tense. She kept glancing at her watch and then toward the tunnel where the train would emerge. She was alone, separated from a small group of passengers by about 30 feet of empty space. Elias noticed her because she was nervous, and in his world, nervous people attracted trouble. Then he saw them. 2 men in dark clothing emerged from the stairwell on the opposite end of the platform. They didn't walk like commuters, they walked with purpose, their heads swiveling slightly, scanning the area. They ignored the other passengers and moved directly toward the woman. Elias felt a primal chill run down his spine. He shrank deeper into his corner, pulling his sleeping bag slightly higher, becoming one with the pillar. The men reached the woman just as the rumble of the approaching train began to echo from the tunnel. One of them spoke to her briefly, his face close to hers. The woman stepped back, shaking her head, her mouth opening in what might have been a plea. The second man glanced around, checking for witnesses. His eyes swept over Elias's pillar but didn't pause. They saw nothing. Then, in the space of a heartbeat, it happened. The first man's hand shot out and pushed the woman hard in the chest. She stumbled backward, her arms flailing, a silent scream on her lips. Her body hit the tracks a split second before the train thundered into the station, its horn blaring too late. The screech of brakes filled the air, but it was over. Elias's breath caught in his throat. And in that exact moment, as the train's headlights flooded the platform, he saw his own reflection in the glass door of the operator's cabin at the front of the train. For one terrible second, his face was illuminated, staring back at him. He quickly looked away, but he knew. He knew the men had seen it too. They were already walking calmly toward the exit, but one of them, the one who had done the pushing, turned his head and looked directly at the pillar. At Elias. The station erupted into chaos. People screamed, guards ran, and the train operator stumbled out of his cabin, his face ashen. Elias didn't move. He couldn't. He watched the 2 men disappear up the stairs, swallowed by the city night, their faces burned into his memory. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Within minutes, the platform was flooded with police officers, paramedics, and transit officials. Yellow tape went up, sealing off the area. Passengers were questioned, their statements taken. Elias remained frozen behind his pillar, hoping, praying that the chaos would swallow him too. A young police officer eventually found him, not because he was looking for him, but because he was checking every corner of the station. The officer, a man named Davies, sighed when he saw Elias. Just another homeless guy, he thought. Another witness who probably saw nothing useful. Elias was pulled out from behind the pillar, blinking in the harsh light. Officer Davies asked him the standard questions. Did you see anything? Were you here when it happened? Elias's voice cracked as he spoke. He told him everything. The two men, the push, the way they looked at him. He described their faces, their clothes, the exact moment it happened. Davies wrote it down, his expression neutral, but Elias could see it in his eyes. The doubt. The dismissal. A homeless man, a drunk, a ghost, claiming to have witnessed a murder? They took his name, or the name he gave them, and told him to wait. He waited for hours, huddled on a bench, watching the crime scene investigators work. Eventually, a detective came. Detective Inspector Morrows, a thin woman with tired eyes and a clipped, efficient manner. She asked him the same questions again. He repeated his story, every detail. She listened, thanked him, and told him someone would be in touch. Then she left. Elias knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that she didn't believe him either. 2 days later, Elias found himself inside a police station for the first time in his life. They had brought him in for a formal statement. He sat in a hard plastic chair in a sterile room, facing Detective Morrows and a man from the district attorney's office. They were polite, almost gentle, but their questions were a maze designed to trip him up. They asked about his drinking. He admitted he had a beer sometimes to sleep. They asked about his psychiatric history. He told them about the clinic he had been to 5 years ago, after his wife died, when the grief had almost swallowed him whole. They nodded, wrote things down, and exchanged glances that spoke volumes. The man from the DA's office, a sleek young man with a condescending smile, showed him a photo lineup. Elias pointed to the man who had done the pushing without hesitation. His finger was steady. The man's smile didn't waver. He asked Elias how he could be so sure, given the lighting, the distance, the shock of the event. Elias explained about the reflection, about seeing his own face and the man's face at the same moment. The man from the DA's office leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. Detective Morrows looked at her notes, then at Elias, and he saw pity in her eyes. Pity, not belief. They thanked him again and had an officer drive him back to the station. He was a liability, a witness with no credibility. The case would be ruled an accident, a tragic fall. The woman's name was Anna Voss, a 34-year-old accountant with no enemies, no criminal record. Just a woman who had a terrible accident late at night. The official report would cite a lack of witnesses and the victim's possible momentary distraction. Elias Keller, the invisible man, had spoken, and the system had chosen not to hear. But the men who had pushed Anna Voss, they were listening. They had seen his face in that reflection. They knew exactly who he was and where to find him. Elias didn't go back to his usual spot at Central Square. Instinct, honed by years of surviving on the streets, told him it was no longer safe. He moved to a different line, a smaller station on the outskirts of the city, a place called Westbridge. It was quieter, with fewer people, fewer eyes. He found a niche near a disused maintenance closet and tried to make himself small again. But he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed deeper, every footstep behind him heavier. 3 nights after giving his statement, he saw them. He was coming back from a public bathroom, a luxury he allowed himself once a day, when he spotted a figure at the far end of the platform. A man in a dark coat, standing perfectly still, scanning the faces of the few people waiting for the train. It wasn't one of the two killers, but the way he stood, the methodical sweep of his eyes, it was the same. A hunter. Elias turned and walked in the opposite direction, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't run, running drew attention. He walked with purpose, as if he knew exactly where he was going. He ducked into a narrow service corridor, then another, using his knowledge of the underground to lose himself in the maze. He emerged on a different platform and immediately boarded a train that was just closing its doors. He rode for 3 stops, got off, and changed lines twice more before finally collapsing on a bench in an industrial part of the city, far from any station. They had found him. How? The police must have his name on file somewhere. Maybe they had his photo. Maybe the killers had someone inside the system, or maybe they just paid the right person for information. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that they were real, they were organized, and they were hunting him. He was no longer invisible. He was a target. Fear is a powerful motivator. For 2 days, Elias didn't sleep in any station. He stayed above ground, moving constantly, riding buses and trams in endless loops, using the last of his meager money on fares. He needed to understand who he was dealing with. He started going to libraries, places where he could sit for hours without being bothered. He used the public computers, his thick fingers clumsy on the keyboard, searching for any news about Anna Voss. The official story was exactly what the police had implied, a tragic accident. But Elias dug deeper. He found old newspaper archives, business registrations, social media profiles that were still active. Anna Voss wasn't just an accountant. She had been a forensic accountant, a specialist in uncovering financial fraud. Her last job had been auditing a large construction conglomerate called the Sterling Group, a company with ties to city contracts, international money, and a man named Victor Cross. Victor Cross wasn't a name in the headlines, he was a name in the footnotes, listed as a major shareholder in several shell companies that fed into Sterling. Elias found a blog post, years old, from a financial journalist who had been investigating Sterling. The journalist had died in a car accident 6 months ago. Then another name, a city planner who had raised questions about Sterling's bidding process. He had retired suddenly and moved abroad. The pattern was there, written in invisible ink, only visible to someone who knew what to look for. Anna Voss had found something. And they had killed her for it. Elias sat in the library, staring at the screen, a strange sensation growing in his chest. It wasn't fear anymore. It was purpose. They had taken his invisibility. Now he would use his only remaining weapon, his ability to see what others ignored. Detective Inspector Claire Morrows couldn't let the case go. Something about Elias Keller bothered her. It wasn't his story, she had heard 1,000 wild tales from desperate people. It was his eyes. They weren't the glassy, unfocused eyes of a chronic alcoholic or a paranoid schizophrenic. They were clear, sharp, and terrified. Terrified of her, yes, but also of something else. She pulled the file on Anna Voss again. It was clean, too clean. The victim had no history of instability, no reason to be so nervous on that platform at 3 a.m. Morrows started asking quiet questions. She called the forensic accountant's former firm. They were tight-lipped, citing client confidentiality. She looked into the Sterling Group, the name that had come up in a few of Anna's old LinkedIn posts. Sterling was a powerful player in the city, with friends in high places. Her boss, Chief Superintendent Hayes, told her to drop it. The case was closed. It was an accident. She was wasting resources. Morrows nodded and said yes, sir, but she didn't drop it. She started working on her own time, late at night, when the station was quiet. She mapped out the connections, the dead journalist, the retired city planner, the shell companies, and at the center of it all, Victor Cross, a man who never appeared in any photograph but whose name was on every document. Then she got a call from a patrol officer in Westbridge. A homeless man had been asking questions about Anna Voss at a public library. The librarian had thought it was suspicious and reported it. The man's name was Elias Keller. Morrows's heart skipped a beat. He was alive. And he was investigating. She found him 2 days later, not in a station, but in a church courtyard, sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons. He looked up when she sat down next to him, and for a moment, she saw the terror return to his eyes. Then it faded, replaced by a weary resignation. He knew why she was there. "You're not safe, Elias." Detective Morrows's voice was low, her eyes scanning the street. "They know about you. I think they have someone inside the department." Elias nodded slowly. "I know. I saw them at Westbridge." Morrows's jaw tightened. She believed him. For the first time since this nightmare began, someone believed him. "I need you to tell me everything again," she said. "Everything you saw, and everything you found since." Elias hesitated, studying her face. She wasn't looking at him with pity anymore. She looked angry. He told her about his research, the shell companies, the journalist, the city planner, Victor Cross. He told her about the two men, describing them again in precise detail. Morrows listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. "The journalist was named Peter Hale," she said quietly. "I found his file. Single car accident, rainy night, bridge. Ruled accidental. And the city planner, Marcus Webb, he retired to Costa Rica 6 months ago. No social media, no forwarding address. It's a pattern." Elias felt a flicker of hope. "So you believe me?" Morrows turned to look at him. "I believe someone is cleaning up loose ends." Anna Voss was an audit away from exposing a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme involving city infrastructure projects. She was a loose end. So was Hale. Webb got scared and ran. And now, you're the only loose end left who can identify the killers. She stood up. "I can't protect you officially. My boss has already warned me off. But I can give you information. And you know the streets better than anyone. Together, maybe we can find something the system can't ignore." An unlikely alliance was born, a disgraced detective and an invisible man, hunting the truth. Their partnership was strange but effective. Morrows provided Elias with burner phones, small amounts of cash, and the location she needed him to watch, a warehouse on the docks owned by a Sterling subsidiary, a private club where Victor Cross was rumored to hold meetings, the home address of the man who had taken over Anna Voss's audit. Elias became her eyes in the places she couldn't go. He melted back into the underground, but this time with a purpose. He watched the warehouse for 3 nights, noting the trucks that came and went at odd hours, the armed security guards who didn't look like ordinary night watchmen. He followed a man in a suit from the private club to a diner, overhearing snippets of conversation about contracts and deadlines. He was terrified every moment, but the terror was now mixed with a cold determination. They wanted him dead. He wanted them exposed. It was a simple equation. One night, while watching the warehouse, he saw him. The man who had pushed Anna Voss. He was getting out of a black car, talking on a phone, his face illuminated by the streetlight. Elias's hand trembled as he pulled out the burner phone and snapped a photo. It was blurry, but it was something. He sent it to Morose. 10 minutes later, she called back. "His name is Dmitry Volkov," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "He's Victor Cross's head of security. Former military, no criminal record, but he's been linked to 3 other incidents that were ruled accidents. This is him, Elias. This is our proof." For the first time, Elias felt like they might actually have a chance. The invisible man had found a ghost, and now the ghost had a name. But Victor Cross was not a man who left loose ends untied. He had built an empire on the principle that problems were solved, not managed. When his men reported that the homeless witness had disappeared from his usual haunts and that a detective was asking questions again, he decided to accelerate the timeline. The trap was simple. One of Morose's colleagues, a detective named Liam Reed, was in debt. Deep debt. Gambling. And Victor Cross owned his debt. Reed was the inside man, the one who had confirmed Elias's identity and location after the initial police interview. Now, Cross used him again. Reed approached Morose at the station, all false concern. He told her he had heard she was working a case on her own, that he wanted to help. He said he had a lead on Dmitry Volkov, a meeting place that night, an abandoned factory on the edge of the city. Morose, desperate for a breakthrough, didn't question it. She called Elias and told him to stay hidden, that she would handle this. But Elias had survived on the streets by trusting his instincts. Something felt wrong. He went to the factory anyway, not to meet her, but to watch from a distance, from a collapsed section of the roof, invisible against the night sky. He saw Morose arrive, alone, her car lights cutting through the darkness. He saw her walk toward the factory entrance. And he saw the men waiting inside, shapes moving in the shadows, Dmitry Volkov among them. It was an ambush. His heart seized. He had to do something. He couldn't let the only person who believed in him die because of his own fears. Elias moved without thinking, a lifetime of hiding suddenly reversed. He climbed down from the roof, his old joints screaming in protest, and circled around to the back of the factory. He found a broken window and squeezed through, landing silently on a pile of debris. He could hear voices from the main floor. Morose's voice, sharp and demanding. Volkov's voice, calm and amused. He crept forward, using the machinery and shadows as cover. He saw them, Morose standing in the center of the open space, surrounded by 4 men, Volkov in front of her. They had taken her gun. She was cornered. "Mr. Cross sends his regards," Volkov was saying. "You should have let the accident remain an accident." Elias looked around desperately. He needed a distraction, a weapon, anything. He spotted a heavy steel pipe leaning against a wall near him. He picked it up, his hands sweating. He was a 60-year-old homeless man, not a hero. But he was also the only witness. And witnesses testify. He stepped out from behind the machinery, the pipe raised. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice cracking but loud in the cavernous space. Everyone turned. Volkov's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in recognition. The ghost. "You're harder to kill than you look." Elias didn't give him time to react. He swung the pipe with all his strength, not at Volkov, but at a stack of old oil barrels nearby. The clang was deafening, echoing off the walls. In the split second of confusion, Moros moved. She lunged forward, slamming her elbow into Volkov's throat, then dropped to the ground, sweeping his legs out from under him. The other men rushed forward, but Elias was already moving, swinging the pipe wildly, keeping them back. Moros scrambled for her gun, which had fallen to the floor. She grabbed it and fired 2 shots into the air. "Freeze! Police!" The men hesitated, and in that hesitation, they heard the sirens. Moros had activated her panic button on the way in. Backup was arriving. The men scattered, fleeing into the darkness of the factory. Volkov tried to crawl away, but Moros had him pinned, her gun at his head. Elias stood over them, breathing heavily, the pipe still in his hands. He had done it. He had come out of the shadows. The factory flooded with police. Volkov was arrested. Detective Reed was identified as the inside man and taken into custody. Moros and Elias were separated, questioned, processed. This time, when Elias told his story, he wasn't sitting in a sterile room with condescending men from the DA's office. He was sitting with a federal prosecutor who had been woken up in the middle of the night and flown in from the capital. Moros had made sure of it. The evidence was overwhelming. Volkov's phone contained calls to Victor Cross. The warehouse Elias had watched was raided, revealing falsified records and stolen equipment. The journalist's car accident was reinvestigated, and new evidence of tampering was found. Marcus Webb, the city planner in Costa Rica, was located and agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. The house of cards began to crumble. Victor Cross was arrested at his private club, trying to burn documents in a fireplace. He maintained his innocence, of course, but the testimony of Dmitry Volkov, offered in exchange for a lesser sentence, sealed his fate. Volkov confessed to the murders of Anna Voss and Peter Hale, confirming that they were ordered by Cross to protect the fraud scheme. The trial was a media sensation. And at the center of it, for a brief, shining moment, was Elias Keller. The invisible man who had seen everything. He was cleaned up, given a suit that didn't fit, and put on the witness stand. He told his story simply, without embellishment, and this time, everyone listened. The verdict came back guilty on all counts. Victor Cross was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dmitry Volkov received 25 years. Detective Liam Reed was disgraced and imprisoned. Detective Inspector Claire Moros received a commendation and a promotion, though she turned down the desk job to stay on the streets. And Elias Keller? He became a minor celebrity, at least for a while. Donations poured in from people who had followed the case. A fund was set up for him. He was offered housing, counseling, a new start. He tried. He really did. He took a small apartment, saw a therapist, even opened a bank account. But the streets had shaped him, and the silence of 4 walls felt more isolating than any train platform. He lasted 6 months. Then, one night, he packed a small bag, left the apartment keys on the table, and walked back down into the metro. He didn't go to Central Square, not anymore. Too many memories. He found a new station, a quiet one on a new line, with a warm vent and a good view of the benches. He sat down, his back against the cold tile, and watched the people rush past. They didn't see him. They never did. But this time, he didn't mind. He had been seen when it mattered. He had spoken, and the world had listened. He pulled his worn jacket tighter and settled in for the night, a faint smile on his weathered face. Above him, the city roared on, oblivious. But Elias Keller, the invisible man, was finally at peace. He had found his purpose and, in doing so, had found himself. And as the trains rumbled through the night, carrying thousands of people to their destinations, he remained, a silent guardian of the forgotten corners, a witness to the truth that lurked in the shadows.